Welcome to Grave Hush. This is a channel where we share horror bedtime stories to help you relax, fall asleep, and enjoy the calm of the night. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a new upload. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is right now as you're tuning in. Sit back, get comfortable, and let the story begin. 2 days ago, I got this email in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line just said, "You need to know what really happened on the Neptune's Glory." No message, just a voice recording attached. The voice belonged to someone named Lisa Chen, former cruise ship employee. What she told me in that 20-minute recording, I've barely slept since listening to it. Lisa worked as a dining room supervisor on luxury cruise ships for 8 years. Professional, experienced, seen everything you'd expect on a floating city with 4,000 passengers and crew. But her last contract on the Neptune's Glory changed everything. "It started with the smell," Lisa's voice said in the recording. 3 days into a Caribbean cruise, there was this odor coming from the lower service decks. Sweet, metallic, like raw meat left out too long. Lisa mentioned it to her supervisor, but was told it was probably just kitchen waste that needed disposal at the next port. Standard explanation that made sense, except the smell got stronger every day. Lisa's job required her to coordinate between the main dining rooms and the ship's galley operations. She knew every kitchen, every storage area, every food preparation zone on the ship. But during this cruise, she kept finding locked doors in areas that had never been restricted before. Service elevators that suddenly required special key cards. Crew members she didn't recognize wearing chef uniforms in areas where no food preparation should be happening. "The passengers started getting sick on day 5, Lisa continued. "Not seasickness, something else. Violent food poisoning, but only affecting certain passengers who'd eaten at the specialty restaurants. The ship's medical bay was overwhelmed. Dozens of passengers with severe stomach illness, vomiting, dehydration. But here's what Lisa found strange. The crew members weren't getting sick, even though they ate from the same galley kitchens. Lisa decided to investigate the restricted areas during her night shift when most passengers were asleep. Using her supervisor key card, she accessed a service elevator that descended 2 levels below the main galley. What she found down there still haunts her. It was a full butcher operation. Lisa's voice shook as she described it. Professional meat processing equipment, industrial grinders, vacuum packaging stations. But this wasn't for normal ship food service. Lisa discovered a refrigeration unit filled with cuts of meat that didn't look like anything served in the dining rooms. The packaging was labeled with codes she didn't recognize, and the meat had an unusual texture and color. Then she found the records. There was a logbook tracking specialty orders for the ship's exclusive restaurants, Lisa explained. Wealthy passengers paying $20,000 per meal for authentic exotic cuisine experiences. The logbook showed passenger names, cabin numbers, and detailed notes about dietary preferences and physical descriptions. But next to some entries were dates marked processed and storage location codes. Lisa realized she was looking at a menu, but not for normal food. She followed the codes to another refrigeration area and found packages labeled with passenger names who had supposedly gotten off the ship at previous ports. But according to the processing dates, they'd been prepared while the ship was still at sea. "I found Harold Morrison's vacation photos scattered near a meat packaging station," Lisa said. Harold was this elderly passenger who'd supposedly had a heart attack and been taken off the ship in Cozumel. But there he was, processed and vacuum-sealed, labeled for a private dinner party. Lisa discovered that certain passengers were being selected based on their isolation. Solo travelers, elderly people with no family contacts, passengers who kept to themselves. The crew would stage medical emergencies, claim the passengers died of natural causes, then their bodies would be processed in the lower deck butcher facility. The ship's wealthy elite passengers paid enormous sums for these exclusive dining experiences, believing they were eating rare exotic meats. The crew split the profits while disposing of evidence in the ocean. The specialty restaurants weren't serving imported Wagyu or exotic game, Lisa said. They were serving missing passengers to unknowing cannibals who thought they were getting premium cuisine. Lisa tried to document everything, but her access was discovered. The head chef, a man named Viktor Kozlov, confronted her in the processing area. He explained it like a business opportunity, Lisa recalled. Said I could join the operation and make more money than I'd ever seen, or I could become part of the next specialty menu. Lisa agreed to participate, but secretly planned to report everything once the cruise ended. She was assigned to help select appropriate candidates from the passenger manifest. They had criteria, Lisa explained. Passengers traveling alone, minimal social media presence, no expected contact with family during the cruise, preferably elderly or in poor health. To make the medical emergency story believable. Lisa's escape came when the ship docked in Miami. She'd hidden copies of the processing records and passenger documentation. As soon as she was on solid ground, she contacted the FBI. But when authorities investigated, the Neptune's glory had already departed for its next cruise. By the time they tracked down the ship, the lower deck facilities had been completely cleaned out. No evidence remained. Viktor Kozlov and several crew members had vanished. The cruise line claimed Lisa was a disgruntled employee making false accusations to damage their reputation. They're still operating, Lisa said at the end of her recording. Different ship, different route, but same crew. I've tracked them through maritime employment records. Victor's working on a Mediterranean cruise line now. Lisa sent me passenger manifests and dining records she'd managed to save. The numbers are horrifying. Dozens of passengers listed as medical emergencies who were actually harvested for the specialty dining operation. The wealthy passengers who paid for those exclusive meals never knew they were participating in cannibalism. They thought they were just getting premium cuisine. The meat market continues, one cruise at a time. My wife works as a maritime insurance investigator, deals with cruise ship incidents and claims. Last Thursday, she came home from work looking completely shaken up, said she'd been assigned to the strangest case of her career. We got a call from the Coast Guard about the Oceanic Majesty, she told me over dinner. Ship went missing for 6 days, then suddenly reappeared in Miami Harbor with all passengers and crew acting like nothing happened. The weird part? The ship's official log showed it had completed a normal 7-day Caribbean cruise, hitting all scheduled ports on time. But maritime tracking data showed the vessel had been stationary in the middle of the Atlantic for 6 straight days. Passengers are posting vacation photos from Cozumel in Jamaica, my wife explained. But satellite imagery confirms the ship never went near those islands. It just sat in empty ocean the whole time. My wife's job was to investigate potential insurance fraud, figure out why the cruise line was claiming a successful voyage when their ship had clearly been adrift at sea. She started interviewing returning passengers, and that's when things got really strange. Every single passenger had identical stories. Same excursions in Cozumel, same shopping experiences in Jamaica, same weather conditions, even the same conversations with crew members. Like they'd all been programmed with the same vacation memories. But their photos told a different story. I'm looking at hundreds of vacation pictures, my wife said, and they're all wrong. Photos supposedly taken in bright Caribbean sunshine show dark, stormy skies. Beach pictures show passengers standing on what looks like ship decking, but they swear they're standing on sand. My wife interviewed the ship's captain, Daniel Hayes, who insisted everything had gone according to schedule. But she noticed something disturbing about his behavior. He kept referring to the ship as she and her, which isn't unusual, my wife explained. But the way he said it, like he was talking about a living person who might be listening to our conversation. Captain Hayes showed my wife the ship's bridge, proudly explaining all the navigation equipment. But when she asked to see the GPS tracking data, his demeanor changed completely. He got this panicked look and said the ship chooses her own course now, my wife recalled. When I asked what that meant, he just stared out at the ocean and whispered, "She's been sleeping for so long, but now she's awake." My wife researched the Oceanic Majesty's construction history and found something that made her skin crawl. The ship had been built in 2010 over the wreckage site of a 19th century slave ship called the Prosperity that had sunk during a storm in 1847. The construction company had used the old wreckage as part of the foundation to save money, incorporating pieces of the original vessel into the new cruise ship's hull. They literally built a luxury cruise ship on top of a mass grave, my wife said. Over 400 people died when the Prosperity went down and their bodies were never recovered. My wife found historical records showing the Prosperity had been transporting enslaved people when it encountered a supernatural storm. Survivors' accounts describe the ship fighting against something in the water before it was dragged down by unseen forces beneath the waves. The same forces that had apparently been trapped under the wreckage for over 150 years. My wife interviewed more Oceanic Majesty passengers and discovered a disturbing pattern. Everyone who'd been on the cruise reported the same recurring dream during their voyage. They all dreamed about being underwater, she explained, trapped in the lower decks of a sinking ship, unable to breathe, calling out for help that never came. But they described it as the most vivid, real experience they'd ever had. My wife realized the passengers hadn't been on a normal cruise at all. For 6 days, the Oceanic Majesty had been possessed by the collective souls of everyone who died on the original Prosperity. The ship had become conscious, drawing power from the passengers' life force while keeping them in a shared supernatural experience. The vacation memories were implanted to cover up what had really happened during those missing days. The passengers were feeding the ship's awakening consciousness, my wife concluded. Their dreams, their energy, their very souls were being slowly absorbed to bring the vessel fully to life. But the process wasn't complete. The Oceanic Majesty needed more. My wife found booking records showing the ship's next cruise had sold out within hours of going online, despite no advertising or promotion. Passengers were being drawn to book passage through some kind of supernatural compulsion. The ship is calling to people, my wife said. Each voyage makes it stronger, more alive, more capable of controlling its passengers and crew. My wife tried to report her findings to the Coast Guard and cruise line authorities, but her investigation was suddenly terminated. Her supervisor said the case was being handled by higher authorities, and she was being reassigned immediately. The Oceanic Majesty departed Miami yesterday for another Caribbean cruise carrying 3,000 new passengers who have no idea they're boarding a living, hungry vessel. My wife's final discovery was the most terrifying. Maritime records show at least 12 other cruise ships worldwide were built over historical shipwreck sites. The Oceanic Majesty isn't the only vessel that's been awakening. The cursed ships are multiplying and they're all getting hungrier. My neighbor Tom Sullivan moved out of his house last month without any explanation. Left behind most of his belongings, wouldn't answer calls, just disappeared overnight with his wife and 2 kids. I found out why yesterday when Tom finally called me from some motel in Nevada. "We can never go near the ocean again," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What happened on that cruise? It followed us home. It's still following us." Tom told me about their family vacation on the Caribbean Princess 3 months ago. His wife, Janet, had booked it as a surprise for their 10th anniversary. Their kids, Emma aged 8 and Michael aged 12, had been excited about their first cruise. Everything started normally, flying into Fort Lauderdale, boarding the massive ship, getting settled in their family suite on Deck 7. The kids were thrilled by the pools, the arcade, the ice cream available 24 hours a day. But on their second night, Emma started having nightmares. She woke up screaming about the shadow children, Tom explained. Said there were kids playing in our cabin while we slept, but they had no faces and their skin was cold like ice water. Tom and Janet figured it was just overstimulation from the new environment. Cruise ships can be overwhelming for kids with all the activities and unfamiliar sounds, but Emma's nightmares got more specific. She described 3 children who would appear in their cabin after midnight. 2 boys and a girl all around her age wearing old-fashioned clothing that looked soaking wet. They would try to get Emma to come play with them in the special room below the ship. Emma drew pictures of them, Tom said. The detail was incredible for an 8-year-old. She drew their faces perfectly, down to the exact way their hair hung wet around their shoulders. On the 3rd night, Michael started seeing them too. But Michael's encounters were different. The shadow children would whisper to him through the cabin's air vents, telling him secrets about other passengers on the ship. Things a 12-year-old couldn't possibly know. Michael told us that the elderly couple in cabin 712 was going to die before the cruise ended, Tom recalled. Said the shadow children showed him the man having a heart attack by the pool on Thursday. Tom and Janet dismissed it as the kids feeding off each other's imagination. But on Thursday morning, the elderly man from cabin 712 collapsed by the pool and died of a massive heart attack. Exactly as Michael had described. That's when Janet started paying attention to what the kids were saying about these supernatural encounters. Emma reported that the shadow children were getting more aggressive, trying to physically pull her out of bed to take her to their special room. She would wake up with wet handprints on her arms and salt water in her hair. Michael said the voices in the vents were getting louder, telling him about more passengers who were marked for collection. He started having detailed knowledge about people's personal lives, their secrets, their fears. On the 4th night, I decided to stay awake and watch, Tom said. I wanted to catch the kids sleepwalking or figure out where these dreams were coming from. What Tom witnessed at 3:17 a.m. changed everything. The cabin's temperature dropped so dramatically that Tom could see his breath. Then he heard children's voices coming from inside the walls, speaking in what sounded like multiple languages at once. Emma sat up in bed with her eyes closed, having a conversation with someone Tom couldn't see. But he could hear responses. Children's voices answering her questions, asking her to come down to the water room where we play forever. Then Tom saw them. 3 translucent figures materialized near Emma's bed. Children exactly as she'd described, wearing period clothing from what looked like the early 1900s. Their skin had a blue-gray tint and water continuously dripped from their hair and clothes onto the cabin floor. The shadow children noticed Tom watching and turned toward him with completely black eyes. They spoke directly to me, Tom recalled, his voice shaking. Said they'd been waiting so long for new friends that Emma and Michael were perfect additions to their collection. Tom grabbed Emma and shook her awake. The moment she opened her eyes, the shadow children vanished, leaving behind only puddles of salt water and the smell of seaweed. But the encounters escalated the next day. Janet was in the cabin alone while Tom took the kids to lunch when she experienced something that left her catatonic for hours. She later described being pulled into a vision where she found herself in the ship's lower decks, but the corridors were filled with water up to her waist. She said she could see dozens of children floating in the water, Tom explained. All wearing the same old-fashioned clothes, all with those black eyes, all reaching up toward her, begging for help. Janet discovered she was in the ship's hull, in rooms that shouldn't exist on a modern cruise vessel. The children floating in the water were decomposing, their flesh falling off their bones, but they were still conscious and calling for their parents. In the vision, Janet learned the truth about the shadow children. The Caribbean Princess had been built using salvaged steel from a passenger ship that sank in 1912 during a hurricane. The original vessel, called the Atlantic Star, had been carrying 200 families when it went down in the same waters the cruise ship now traveled. Among the victims were dozens of children whose bodies were never recovered. Their souls had been bound to the salvaged metal when it was incorporated into the new ship's construction. Janet said the children showed her what really happened, Tom continued. The Atlantic Star didn't sink because of the storm. Something underwater had grabbed the ship and pulled it down deliberately. Some kind of oceanic entity that feeds on human souls. The same entity was still active in these waters, using the bound children's spirits to lure new victims. Janet's vision revealed the children's purpose on the Caribbean Princess. They were recruiters tasked with selecting young souls to join their underwater collection. Emma and Michael had been chosen because their life force was bright and pure. When Janet snapped out of the vision, she found her cabin flooded with several inches of salt water, even though they were on the 7th deck. The water was ice cold and filled with seaweed that shouldn't exist in the Caribbean. That night, the paranormal activity reached a terrifying climax. The shadow children appeared not just in their cabin, but throughout the entire ship. Other families started reporting encounters with drowned children who would appear in elevators, dining rooms, even the swimming pools. Tom discovered that multiple families with young children were experiencing identical supernatural encounters. The shadow children were systematically working their way through the ship, evaluating potential recruits for their underwater realm. The ship's crew knew, Tom said. They'd been covering up these incidents for years. Passengers would report paranormal encounters, but the crew would claim it was seasickness or vacation stress. Tom found incident reports hidden in the guest services computer system. Dozens of families had reported supernatural encounters with drowned children over the past several years. Some families had even reported children disappearing during cruises, only to be found hours later in restricted areas of the ship with no memory of how they got there. The most disturbing discovery was a pattern in the ship's passenger manifest. Certain cabins were systematically assigned to families with children matching specific age profiles. The cruise line was deliberately placing targeted families in rooms where paranormal activity was strongest. On their final night, the shadow children made their move. Tom woke up to find Emma and Michael missing from their beds. Following wet footprints through the ship's corridors, he tracked them down to a restricted area in the ship's lower decks that passengers weren't supposed to access. He found his children standing waist-deep in a flooded compartment that definitely shouldn't exist on the ship. They were surrounded by dozens of other children, both living passengers and the shadow children, all holding hands in a circle around what looked like a whirlpool in the center of the flooded room. The living children were in some kind of trance, Tom recalled. Their eyes were completely black, just like the shadow children. They were chanting in that same multi-language voice, calling something up from the water. Tom realized he was witnessing a summoning ritual. The shadow children had collected enough young souls to call forth the oceanic entity that had originally sunk the Atlantic star. The whirlpool in the center of the flooded room began to glow with an eerie blue-green light. Something massive was rising from the depths, responding to the children's call. Tom grabbed Emma and Michael, breaking their trance by shouting their names. The moment they snapped out of the possession, the other living children did too, and chaos erupted as confused kids started screaming and trying to escape the flooded compartment. The shadow children became enraged, their forms becoming more solid and threatening. They tried to physically prevent the living children from leaving, grabbing at them with ice-cold hands that left black marks on their skin. Tom managed to get his family and several other children out of the flooded area, but not before seeing what emerged from the whirlpool. Something tentacled and massive, with too many eyes and a mouth full of rows of shark-like teeth. The entity spoke directly into Tom's mind, promising that it would follow his family until it claimed what was promised, the souls of Emma and Michael. The cruise ended the next morning, but the paranormal activity didn't stop when they got home. The shadow children followed us, Tom explained. They'd appear in our house, in the kids' school, even in my office at work, always trying to complete what they started on the ship. Emma and Michael began showing signs of supernatural influence. They would sleepwalk toward any body of water, bathtubs, swimming pools, even puddles after rain. They started speaking in those ancient languages during their sleep, having conversations with the shadow children who continued to visit them. The family tried everything, priests, psychics, even moving to different houses. But the oceanic entity had marked them during that cruise, and its influence was growing stronger. Last week I found Emma standing in our neighbor's pool at 3 a.m., Tom said. She was completely submerged but somehow breathing underwater. When I pulled her out, she said the shadow children were teaching her how to live beneath the waves. That's when Tom realized they had to run. The family is now living in the Nevada desert, as far from any large body of water as possible. But even there, the paranormal activity continues. Emma draws pictures of underwater cities filled with drowned children. Michael speaks in ancient languages about the deep calling and the time of gathering. We can never go back to normal life, Tom concluded. The entity marked our children and it won't stop until it collects them. Every night we hear the shadow children calling from the water pipes, the shower drains, anywhere water flows. Tom believes the Caribbean Princess is still operating, still targeting families with young children for the Oceanic Entities collection. The cruise line covers up the paranormal encounters to protect their business, while the shadow children continue recruiting new souls for their underwater realm. Don't take your kids on cruises, Tom warned me. The ocean remembers every soul it's claimed, and it's always hungry for more. What looks like a family vacation might be a recruitment trip to hell. The Sullivan family is still running, still hiding from an ancient evil that considers their children promised souls. And somewhere in the Caribbean, the shadow children are still playing their deadly games with new families who have no idea what they've sailed into. The deep waters never forget, and they never stop collecting. Guys, what I'm about to tell you happened just 2 weeks ago on a cruise ship in the Atlantic Ocean. The crew member who experienced this sent me the full details, and I'm warning you right now, this story will mess with your head, so listen carefully. It's 11:47 p.m. on the luxury cruise ship Ocean Dreams. The ship has been sailing for 3 hours and is now in the middle of the Atlantic, hundreds of miles from any land. Sarah, the night receptionist, is alone at the front desk. The lobby is empty, dimly lit, and she's just finishing up some paperwork on her computer. Everything is normal until the lights start flickering. Not just a quick flicker, they go on and off repeatedly, and the ship starts making these deep, groaning sounds she's never heard before in her 2 years working on cruises. Then she hears footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing through the empty corridor, getting closer and closer to her desk. Remember, guys, it's almost midnight. All passengers should be in their cabins, and they're in the middle of the ocean. There's literally nowhere for anyone new to come from. A man in his 30s approaches her desk. He's wearing this vintage 1920s suit that looks like it belongs in a museum. His skin is deathly pale, almost gray, and when Sarah looks at his eyes, she later told investigators it was like staring into empty black holes. The man speaks in this flat, emotionless voice. I need to check in. Sarah explains the check-in closed hours ago and the ship has already departed. But this guy just stares at her without blinking and slides something across the desk. It's a boarding pass, but when Sarah picks it up, her hands start shaking. The paper is old, yellow and brittle, like it's been sitting in an attic for decades. The date on it reads, October 15th, 1924. Sarah thinks it's some kind of prank, so she searches for his name in the computer system. She types Marcus Reed multiple times, but nothing comes up. This person doesn't exist in their passenger database. That's when things get terrifying. The temperature in the lobby suddenly drops at least 20 degrees. Sarah can see her breath in the air. Her computer screen starts glitching, showing random images. Old ship manifests from the 1920s. Newspaper headlines about missing vessels and faces of passengers who disappeared at sea a century ago. Marcus leans closer and says something that still gives me chills. I received this story in my DM. So let me tell you what really happened. Guys, how does a passenger from 1924 know what a DM is? What does that even mean? Lightning strikes outside, illuminating the entire lobby for a split second. That's when Sarah notices something that makes her scream. In the window's reflection behind Marcus, there's nothing there. He's standing right in front of her, but he casts no reflection. Sarah hits the emergency button, calling for security, but when she turns back to look at Marcus, he's gone. Vanished completely. The only evidence he was ever there is the boarding pass on the counter, and as Sarah stares at it, the paper starts crumbling into dust right before her eyes. Her computer screen flickers one final time and displays a message in old Gothic letters. Passenger manifest updated, Marcus Reed, cabin unknown, voyage eternal. The screen goes black. But guys, this is where the story takes a horrifying turn. In the black reflection of her computer screen, Sarah sees Marcus standing directly behind her chair. He whispers in her ear, "Some passengers never truly disembark." Sarah collapses unconscious. Security arrives 2 minutes later and finds her passed out at the desk. The computer shows no record of any system updates. There's no boarding pass, no dust, nothing. But here's what makes this story absolutely terrifying. They check the security cameras. The footage shows Sarah having a 15-minute conversation with empty air. The cameras recorded her taking something invisible from nowhere, typing frantically on her computer, and then suddenly collapsing. No one else appears in the footage. She was alone the entire time. The next morning, Sarah insists it really happened. So the security chief decides to investigate. He searches the ship's historical records and finds something that makes everyone's blood run cold. In 1924, a passenger named Marcus Reed boarded a cruise ship called the SS Aurora on the exact same Atlantic route. That ship disappeared in a storm 3 days into the voyage. All 342 passengers and crew were declared lost at sea. No wreckage was ever found. But here's the most chilling part. Over the past century, cruise ships on this same route have reported identical incidents. A pale man in a 1920s suit appearing at reception desks at midnight, always carrying a boarding pass dated October 15, 1924. Every single time Marcus Reed has been sighted, something catastrophic happens to the ship within 48 hours. Engine failures, fires, collisions, storms, always something that puts everyone on board in mortal danger. The crew calls him the Midnight Passenger, a ghost who's been trying to complete his voyage for 100 years, and he brings disaster to every ship he boards. 24 hours after Sarah's encounter, the Ocean Dreams experienced a complete electrical failure during a sudden storm. The backup systems failed, communications went down, and the ship was dead in the water for 6 terrifying hours. They barely made it back to port. But guys, here's what really haunts me about this story. When they finally restored the ship's computer systems, there was one new entry in the passenger manifest that hadn't been there before. Marcus Reed cabin unknown voyage eternal status still boarding. The entry couldn't be deleted. Every time they removed it, it reappeared. Sarah quit her job the next day. She told her manager that she could still hear Marcus whispering in her ear, "Some passengers never truly disembark." And the scariest part? 3 more cruise ships on the same Atlantic route have reported Marcus Reed sightings in the past 2 weeks. So if you're ever on a cruise ship and see a pale man in a vintage suit trying to check in after midnight, don't help him. Because once Marcus Reed is on your passenger list, your voyage becomes part of his eternal journey. And that journey has been going for 100 years, with no destination in sight. Let me know in the comments if you want more real cruise ship horror stories, because I have 5 more that will keep you awake at night. Last week, I got a message from someone who worked on the Royal Caribbean's newest cruise ship, and what he told me is absolutely terrifying. This happened just 2 months ago, and the cruise line is trying to cover it up. Let me tell you exactly what went down. There was this passenger named James Mitchell, a 32-year-old engineer from Chicago. James had booked a solo trip on the Ocean Voyager, a massive 15-deck cruise ship on its 3rd voyage. James was an experienced cruiser. He'd been on at least 20 different ships, so he knew his way around these floating cities. On the 4th night of the cruise, James couldn't sleep. It was around 2:45 a.m. when he decided to go for a walk. He left his cabin on Deck 9 and headed toward the elevator, planning to go up to Deck 12 where the late-night cafe was still open. James pressed the elevator button and waited. When the doors opened, he stepped inside and hit the button for Deck 12. The elevator started moving up, but something felt wrong. It was taking much longer than usual, and James could hear strange creaking sounds coming from above. When the elevator finally stopped and the doors opened, James stepped out and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. This wasn't Deck 12. This wasn't like any part of the ship he'd ever seen before. The hallway in front of him was narrow and dimly lit with old-fashioned oil lanterns hanging from the walls. The floor wasn't the modern carpet he expected. It was old wooden planks that creaked under his feet. The walls were made of dark, weathered wood, and the whole area smelled like seawater and rust. James looked back at the elevator panel. It clearly showed Deck 13. But James knew this ship only had 15 decks, and like most cruise ships, it skipped Deck 13 and went directly from 12 to 14. James started walking down the corridor, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Along both sides of the hallway were cabin doors, but these weren't modern cruise ship rooms. These doors were heavy, made of dark wood with old brass handles and small round windows. As James walked, he could hear sounds coming from behind some of the doors, muffled voices, footsteps, and what sounded like people moving around inside the cabins. James stopped at one of the doors and peered through the small window. Inside, he saw a man sitting on a narrow bed wearing clothes that looked like they were from the 1940s. The man was just sitting there, staring at the wall, not moving. James tried the door handle. It was unlocked. He opened the door slightly and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" The man turned to look at James, and what James saw made his blood freeze. The man's eyes were completely white. No pupils, no iris, just solid white. The man opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. James slammed the door shut and backed away. That's when he heard footsteps behind him. James turned around and saw a figure walking toward him from the other end of the corridor. It was a tall man wearing what looked like an old ship officer's uniform, a dark blue jacket with gold buttons, a captain's hat, and white gloves. As the officer got closer, James could see that his skin was pale, almost gray, and his face looked ancient, like he'd been at sea for decades. The officer stopped about 10 feet away from James and spoke in a voice that sounded hollow and distant. "Welcome to Deck 13, Mr. Mitchell. We've been expecting you." James was terrified. "How do you know my name? What is this place?" The officer smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "This is where passengers come when they want to stay on the ship forever. Once you find Deck 13, you never have to leave the cruise." James started backing toward the elevator. "I want to go back to my cabin. This is impossible. This deck doesn't exist." The officer kept walking toward him. "Oh, but it does exist, Mr. Mitchell. It exists for people like you, people who love cruising so much that they never want the voyage to end. Look around you. All these cabins are occupied by passengers who chose to stay." James looked at the doors lining the corridor and realized with horror that there were sounds coming from all of them. Dozens of cabins, all occupied by people who had somehow ended up on this impossible deck. James ran toward the elevator and frantically pressed the call button. Nothing happened. The officer was getting closer. "Don't be afraid, Mr. Mitchell. Your cabin is ready for you. Room 1347. It has everything you need for an eternal voyage." Finally, the elevator doors opened. James jumped inside and pressed every button he could find. As the doors started to close, he saw the officer reaching out toward him, but the doors shut just in time. The elevator descended, and James watched the numbers change. 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. When it stopped at Deck 9, James ran out and sprinted to his cabin. The next morning, James went straight to the guest services desk. He told them everything that had happened and demanded to know about Deck 13. The staff member, a woman named Lisa, looked confused. She pulled up the ship's layout on her computer and showed James that there was no Deck 13. The ship went from Deck 12 directly to Deck 14, just like most buildings skip the 13th floor. James insisted he'd been there. He described the wooden corridors, the oil lanterns, the strange cabins, and the ghostly officer. Lisa called her supervisor, and together they reviewed the security footage from the previous night. What they found was absolutely disturbing. The cameras showed James entering the elevator at 2:47 a.m. and pressing the button for Deck 12. But then for exactly 52 minutes, James completely disappeared from all security cameras on the ship. No camera on any deck showed him during that time. At 3:39 a.m., the cameras picked him up again, showing him running out of an elevator on deck 9, looking terrified and panicked. But here's the most frightening part. During those 52 minutes when James was missing from the cameras, the elevator he had been in was recorded going up and down between floors, but the security footage showed it was completely empty. Lisa's supervisor, a man named Captain Rodriguez, decided to investigate personally. That night at 2:45 a.m., he positioned himself near the elevators with a security team and cameras. At exactly 2:47 a.m., they watched as elevator number 3 started moving on its own. The display showed it was going to deck 13. Captain Rodriguez and 2 security officers got into another elevator and tried to follow it, but their elevator wouldn't go past deck 12. When elevator number 3 came back down 52 minutes later, it was empty, just like the security footage had shown with James. But the next morning, James Mitchell was gone. His cabin was empty, his belongings were missing, and when they checked the passenger manifest, there was no record of anyone named James Mitchell ever boarding the ship. Captain Rodriguez checked with the cruise line's headquarters. According to their records, no one by that name had booked passage on the Ocean Voyager. But the most terrifying discovery came when Captain Rodriguez reviewed the ship's historical records. Over the past 2 years, 17 passengers had reported encounters with Deck 13. Every single one of them had disappeared within 24 hours of their report. The cruise line quietly retired the Ocean Voyager after that voyage. Captain Rodriguez was transferred to a different ship, but not before he sent me this entire story. He told me that sometimes late at night on other ships he still hears elevator bells ringing at 2:47 a.m., and when he checks the displays they show elevators going to floors that don't exist. Guys, if you're ever on a cruise ship and you find yourself on an elevator going to a deck that shouldn't be there, don't get off, because some passengers who find those decks decide to stay forever. And according to Captain Rodriguez, they're always looking for new neighbors. Last week, my cousin who works for a major cruise line called me at 2 a.m., absolutely terrified. She wouldn't tell me the details over the phone, but she insisted I meet her the next day. When we met, she showed me internal company documents and security footage that she had copied before quitting her job. What she revealed to me is going to shake you to your core. This happened on the Royal Princess during their Greek Islands cruise just 5 weeks ago. The ship was carrying over 3,500 passengers and 1,100 crew members for a standard 8-day Mediterranean voyage. My cousin Jessica worked as the assistant hotel manager on that ship. Her job was to handle guest complaints, staff schedules, and passenger services. For 3 years, she had run that department smoothly without any major issues. But on day 4 of this particular cruise, something strange started happening. Passengers began leaving incredible reviews about a crew member named Daniel. Not just 1 or 2 passengers, but dozens of them, all praising this amazing staff member who had gone above and beyond to help them. Daniel from room service brought us fresh towels at midnight when we ran out. The bartender Daniel made my wife the perfect cocktail even though the bar was closed. Daniel helped us find our lost wedding ring in the theater. The concierge Daniel got us reservations at a restaurant that was fully booked. Jessica was thrilled to hear such positive feedback, so she decided to find Daniel and recommend him for Employee of the Month. She searched through all the staff rosters, department lists, and crew manifests. There was no employee named Daniel working on the ship. Jessica thought maybe passengers were confused about the name, so she checked for Dennis, David, Damien, or any similar names. Nothing. Out of 1,100 crew members, not one was named Daniel or anything close to it. But the compliments kept pouring in. Every hour, more passengers would approach the guest services desk, specifically to praise Daniel's exceptional service. Jessica started asking these passengers to describe Daniel in detail. What she heard made her increasingly uncomfortable. Mr. Richard Foster from Texas described Daniel as a young Asian man, maybe 25 years old, working in housekeeping with a soft-spoken manner. Mrs. Linda Chen from California said Daniel was a tall white guy in his 40s with gray hair, working as a sommelier in the wine bar. The Johnson family from Florida insisted Daniel was a black man in his 30s who worked in the kids' club and spoke with a Caribbean accent. These weren't just different opinions about the same person. These were completely different human beings. Jessica was confused. She brought the issue to her supervisor, hotel manager Anthony Rodriguez. Anthony had worked on cruise ships for 15 years and had never encountered anything like this. They decided to review security camera footage from areas where passengers claimed to have interacted with Daniel. What they saw on those cameras was impossible. The footage showed passengers having full conversations with empty spaces. Mrs. Chen was recorded at the wine bar, nodding and smiling while an invisible sommelier apparently explained different wines to her. The camera clearly showed wine glasses moving by themselves and being placed in front of her. Mr. Foster was filmed in his cabin hallway, shaking hands with nothing, while his suitcases were mysteriously moved from the corridor into his room by unseen hands. The Johnson family was captured in the kids' area with their children laughing and playing games with someone who simply wasn't there. Toys were moving around, craft supplies were being handed out, but no person was visible doing these activities. Anthony was disturbed. He called the security chief, Commander Paul Harrison, to review more footage and investigate further. Commander Harrison spent 6 hours going through surveillance recordings. Every single interaction that passengers attributed to Daniel showed the same pattern: people talking to empty air, receiving services from invisible hands, and expressing gratitude to someone who wasn't there. But then Commander Harrison discovered something that made his blood run cold. The ship's point-of-sale system showed hundreds of transactions processed by employee ID number DW2847. Drinks sold by Daniel, room service charges authorized by Daniel, spa appointments booked by Daniel, shore excursions arranged by Daniel. Commander Harrison looked up employee ID DW2847 in the personnel database. The ID belonged to Daniel Walsh, listed as a guest services representative hired 3 months ago with excellent performance ratings and glowing supervisor reviews. But when Commander Harrison tried to access Daniel's employee file for his photograph, personal information, or hiring paperwork, the computer system showed an error message. File corrupted. Unable to display personnel data. Anthony called the cruise line's Human Resources Department in Miami. After 2 hours of searching their records, HR confirmed that they had no record of hiring anyone named Daniel Walsh. No application, no background check, no contract, no payroll information. Yet somehow Daniel Walsh was in their active employee database, processing transactions and receiving perfect performance evaluations from supervisors who swore they had never met him. Jessica decided to investigate the supervisory reviews. She contacted each department head who had supposedly evaluated Daniel's performance. The head of housekeeping, Maria Gonzalez, was shocked. "I never wrote any review for a Daniel Walsh. I don't know anyone by that name in my department." The food and beverage manager, Pierre Dubois, was equally confused. "There's no Daniel Walsh working in my restaurants or bars. I've never seen this name before." One by one, every supervisor who had allegedly given Daniel excellent ratings denied ever meeting him or writing any evaluations. Yet the computer system showed detailed performance reviews, signed with their digital signatures, praising Daniel's exceptional work ethic and customer service skills. Jessica accessed the security footage from the manager's offices during the times these reviews were supposedly written. The cameras showed each manager sitting at their computers typing on keyboards, but their screens displayed blank documents. They appeared to be writing detailed reviews about someone who didn't exist while looking at empty forms. The situation became even more terrifying when Jessica checked Daniel's work schedule. According to the computer system, Daniel was scheduled to work in 6 different departments simultaneously: housekeeping, food service, entertainment, guest relations, spa services, and shore excursions. It was physically impossible for one person to be in 6 different locations at the same time. Commander Harrison made the decision to conduct a complete crew head count. Every employee was required to report to designated assembly stations to be physically counted and verified against the manifest. The count came back exactly as it should be. 1,100 crew members present and accounted for. But when they cross-referenced the names with their employee database, they found 1,101 active employee records. Daniel Walsh was listed as present at the assembly, but no physical person had checked in under that name. That night, Jessica was working late in her office when she heard a knock on her door. She opened it to find no one there, but on her desk was a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for your concern about my employment status. I appreciate the opportunity to serve the passengers on this wonderful ship. Daniel Walsh, Guest Services." Jessica had locked her office when she went to answer the door. No one could have entered the room. The handwriting on the note matched the signature in Daniel's personnel file perfectly. Jessica quit her job the next morning when they reached port. She told me that the most terrifying part wasn't the mysterious transactions or the invisible employee. It was checking the passenger satisfaction surveys after the cruise ended. Daniel Walsh received a 100% positive rating from passengers with comments like, "Best crew member ever." And Daniel made our entire vacation perfect. Over 400 passengers left glowing reviews for someone who never existed. My cousin Jessica showed me copies of these surveys. Every single one praised Daniel's helpfulness, professionalism, and friendly attitude. But when she cross-checked the passenger names who left these reviews with the ship's manifest, she found that 127 of them had never been on the cruise. They were reviewing a crew member who didn't exist on a cruise they never took. Because sometimes the most helpful employee is the one who was never hired in the first place. This is the story of William Parker, a 52-year-old business executive from Chicago who took a 7-day cruise on the Celebrity Eclipse. William had been working non-stop for months and desperately needed a break from his stressful job. On his first night aboard the ship, William was exhausted and decided to order room service to his balcony suite. He called and ordered a simple club sandwich and fries. The person who answered spoke in a strange, formal, old-fashioned manner, but William was too tired to think about it. 45 minutes later, William heard a knock on his door. When he opened it, no one was there. On the floor was a silver room service cart with elaborate covered dishes. William looked down the empty hallway, confused, then wheeled the cart inside. When he lifted the covers, he found a complete formal dinner. Prime rib with Yorkshire pudding and roasted vegetables. This definitely wasn't his club sandwich. The bill was even stranger. The prime rib was listed at $3.75, vegetables at $0.95, and wine for $2.50, total $7.20. William knew room service on cruise ships cost at least $60 for such a meal. William called room service to complain. The same formal voice answered and insisted William had ordered the prime rib dinner. When William said he'd ordered a sandwich, the voice replied, "I'm terribly sorry, sir, but we don't serve club sandwiches. This is 1962 and our menu features traditional roasts." William thought the crew member was confused and hung up. The food looked incredible, so he ate it. It was the best meal he'd ever tasted. Rich, complex flavors prepared with impossible attention to detail. The next morning, William went to guest services to compliment the chef. Manager Sandra Martinez looked confused when William described his meal. She checked his room service records on her computer. According to the system, William had ordered a club sandwich and fries for $28.50. There was no record of any prime rib dinner or $7.20 charge. Sandra called the room service manager, who confirmed they'd delivered exactly what William ordered. A club sandwich at 10:47 p.m. William insisted this was wrong and reached for the receipt to prove it, but it had vanished from his wallet. Sandra reviewed security footage from William's hallway. The cameras showed William bringing in a standard cart with a single covered plate. No elaborate silver cart, no multiple dishes, and no crew member visible. Most disturbing was what happened next in the video. The cameras showed William eating from empty plates, lifting empty forks to his mouth and drinking from an empty glass. That evening, William decided to test what would happen again. He ordered a Caesar salad and grilled chicken, writing down exactly what he requested and the time. When he called, the same formal voice seemed confused by Caesar salad. "We don't have that available, sir. Might I suggest our shrimp cocktail and beef Wellington? It's Chef Marcel's specialty." William had never heard of Chef Marcel, and beef Wellington wasn't on the menu, but he agreed. 30 minutes later came the knock. Again, no one was there, but an elegant cart waited with fine china and an elaborate 1960s-style presentation. The beef Wellington was extraordinary, and the bill showed $8.95 total. William decided to catch whoever was delivering these meals. He positioned himself by the door at 10:45 p.m. and looked through the peephole. What he saw made his blood freeze. A room service cart was rolling down the corridor by itself. No person pushing it, no crew member guiding it. The cart moved smoothly and purposefully, controlled by invisible hands. William watched it stop at his door. He heard 3 polite knocks, but when he looked through the peephole, only the cart and empty hallway were visible. Terrified but curious, William opened the door. The hallway was empty, but the cart was perfectly positioned with another elaborate meal. This time he noticed a small silver nameplate. Chef Marcel Dubois, Executive Chef, SS Normandy, 1962 to 1965. William researched on his phone and discovered something horrifying. Chef Marcel Dubois had been executive chef on a cruise ship called Ocean Dream in 1962. The ship sank in an Atlantic storm, killing all 847 passengers and crew. The final radio transmission included Chef Marcel's message, "Still serving dinner to our guests. They deserve the finest meal possible, even in our final hours." Over his remaining 4 cruise days, William continued receiving these impossible deliveries. Each meal was perfect, each bill showed 1960s prices, and each left him feeling like he dined with a ghost from ocean travel's golden age. On his final night, William found a handwritten note. "Thank you for allowing me to serve you, Mr. Parker. It has been my honor. I hope you have enjoyed your voyage. Chef Marcel Dubois." The handwriting was elegant, written with a fountain pen. When William checked out, his official room service charges showed only the modern meals he'd ordered. Club sandwich, Caesar salad, grilled chicken. No record of Chef Marcel's elaborate dinners or vintage prices existed, but William kept the handwritten note as proof. 3 weeks later, William received a mysterious package at his office. Inside was a cookbook, Classic French Cuisine for Ocean Voyagers by Marcel Dubois, published in 1961. The inscription read, "To Mr. William Parker, a gentleman who appreciates fine dining. May these recipes bring you joy. Bon appétit." Chef Marcel Williams still has that cookbook. He told me that sometimes late at night in his kitchen he smells the incredible aromas from those impossible meals. And occasionally when cooking from Chef Marcel's recipes, William hears faint cartwheels rolling down his hallway, followed by 3 polite knocks. When he opens the door, no one's there, just the lingering scent of a perfect meal, prepared by a chef who refuses to let death end his service to grateful passengers. Because some people are so dedicated to their craft that they continue working long after their final shift should have ended. I received a terrifying voice message last night from someone who used to work on cruise ships. And after you hear this story, you'll never look at ship freezers the same way again. This happened on the Norwegian Star just 6 weeks ago. There was this passenger named Robert Hayes, a 38-year-old teacher from Boston who had saved up for years to take his dream cruise through Alaska. Robert was excited about everything. He took photos of his meals, posted updates on social media, and even made friends with some of the crew members. On day 5 of the 7-day cruise, the head chef Antonio was doing his usual evening inventory in the main galley freezer. This freezer was massive, the size of a small room where they stored all the meat and frozen goods for 3,000 passengers. Antonio opened the heavy steel door and immediately knew something was wrong. There, standing perfectly upright in the back corner, was Robert Hayes. He was frozen completely solid, covered in frost, his skin blue-white, still wearing the same Hawaiian shirt he'd worn to dinner 3 nights earlier. Antonio screamed and ran to get security. When Officer Williams arrived with the medical team, they found Robert in an impossible position. He was standing straight up, arms at his sides, eyes closed, like he had simply walked into the freezer and decided to take a nap standing up. Dr. Peterson, the ship's physician, examined the body and immediately called for an emergency meeting with the captain. What he discovered made no medical sense whatsoever. Robert had been frozen solid for approximately 96 hours, 4 full days. But according to the ship's records, Robert had been active and interacting with people just 2 days ago. He'd eaten breakfast in the buffet, attended a cooking class, and even won a trivia contest in the main theater. The security team pulled every piece of surveillance footage from the past week. The cameras showed Robert's normal activities for the first 3 days of the cruise. But then something strange happened. On day 4, the footage showed Robert walking toward the service elevators that led to the crew areas and storage decks. These elevators were restricted to passengers, but somehow Robert had gotten access. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. Here's where it gets terrifying. The cameras recorded Robert entering service elevator B, but there was no footage of him ever getting out. The elevator went down to deck A, where the freezer was located, stayed there for exactly 23 minutes, then came back up empty. But Officer Williams discovered something that made his hands shake. During those exact 23 minutes when Robert was supposedly in the freezer, the ship's automated systems recorded a massive temperature spike in that area. Instead of the normal -10 degrees Fahrenheit, the freezer had somehow reached -60 degrees for those 23 minutes, then returned to normal. The maintenance chief, Elena Vasquez, checked the freezer's mechanical systems. Everything was functioning perfectly. There was no malfunction, no explanation for the temperature drop, and no record of anyone accessing the freezer's controls. But Elena found something even more disturbing in the system logs. The freezer door had been opened from the inside during those 23 minutes. Not from the outside where the handle was located, but from inside the freezer itself. The freezer had no internal handle. Once that door closed, it could only be opened from the outside. Dr. Peterson re-examined Robert's body and made a discovery that violated everything he knew about human physiology. The ice crystals in Robert's tissue showed a pattern he'd never seen before. Instead of forming randomly like normal freezing, the ice had formed in perfect geometric patterns, almost like snowflakes throughout his entire body. More disturbing was the expression on Robert's face. Even frozen solid, he looked peaceful, almost happy, like he had died in a state of complete contentment. Officer Williams decided to interview everyone who had interacted with Robert after the timestamp showed him entering the service elevator. The results were horrifying. Maria, a dining room server, remembered serving Robert breakfast 2 days after he was supposedly already frozen. She described him as unusually calm and quiet, barely speaking, just smiling and nodding. But when they reviewed the security footage of that breakfast, the cameras showed Maria serving food to an empty chair. The bartender, Jake, remembered making Robert 3 drinks the day after his supposed death. Jake said Robert just stood at the bar smiling, never actually drinking anything, just holding the glass. The security footage showed Jake talking to empty air and sliding drinks across the bar to no one. Most terrifying was the testimony from Sarah, the activities coordinator. She swore that Robert had won the trivia contest 2 days after his death. She remembered him answering every question correctly, even ones about current events that happened after his supposed death date. The footage of the trivia contest showed Sarah calling out questions and announcing a winner, but the camera revealed an empty chair where Robert should have been sitting. Captain Morrison ordered a complete investigation. They discovered that Robert's room key card had been used 47 times after his death, accessing his cabin, the dining rooms, and various ship amenities. But the security cameras showed the doors opening and closing by themselves. The most chilling evidence came from Robert's social media accounts. His Facebook and Instagram showed new posts every day after his death, including photos of ship activities, meals, and scenic views from the cruise. The photos were taken from his phone, which was found in his frozen hand. But when they examined the photos closely, something was wrong with each image. In group photos, there was always an empty space where Robert should have been standing. In selfies, the phone appeared to be floating in mid-air. The final piece of evidence that made Captain Morrison end the cruise immediately was found in Robert's cabin. On his desk was a handwritten journal entry dated the day after his death. It read, "Day 6 of the cruise. I'm having the most wonderful time. I never want this vacation to end. I think I've found a way to stay on the ship forever. The cold doesn't bother me anymore. Nothing bothers me anymore. I'm so happy here." The handwriting matched Robert's perfectly, but the paper was frozen solid, covered in frost, and when they tried to pick it up, it crumbled like it had been in a freezer for weeks. Captain Morrison made the decision to have Robert's body cremated immediately when they reached port. But 3 crew members, including Officer Williams, reported seeing Robert in various parts of the ship during the cremation ceremony. The Norwegian Star was taken out of service for maintenance after that voyage, but Officer Williams told me the real reason. During the final cleaning before decommission, they found 23 other handwritten journal entries hidden throughout the ship, all in Robert's handwriting, all dated after his death. Each entry described different cruise activities, different meals, different shows. Like Robert was living an entire cruise vacation in some parallel existence. The last entry, found in the freezer itself, simply read, "This is the perfect cruise. I never have to go home. I never have to leave. Thank you for letting me stay forever." Officer Williams quit his job after that. He told me that sometimes late at night he still gets friend requests on Facebook from Robert Hayes' account. The profile shows Robert still posting photos from cruise ships, still smiling, still having the perfect vacation. The photos are always taken in empty corridors, empty dining rooms, empty decks, because some passengers find a way to keep their cruise going forever, even when their bodies can't handle the journey anymore.